Good evening, everybody. My name is Sinead and I work with Limerick City and County Council as the Environment Awareness Officer. My colleague here, Pat Stevens, is the manager of the Limerick Clare Energy Agency. And today we're going to do a webinar on carbon footprinting. Just a note of things. So we're going to do an overview of climate change, a little bit about the Limerick Clare Energy Agency, carbon footprint, greenhouse gas energy emissions, the carbon footprint from a personal perspective, carbon footprint from a business perspective, and tips, tools, and resources, and then a little bit about the Limerick Positive City Exchange project. Our presentation tonight is based within the sustainability goals, if you like. These are UN goals. Ireland is a signatory, and there are at least 6 of them that directly are involved in the presentation we're giving this evening, like the affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry innovation, sustainable cities, responsible consumption and production, and climate action. But every one of the 17 are interlinked, and really you could find something for all of them here tonight. Climate change, climate crisis. Papers like The Guardian have begun to leave climate change alone. They're using emergency and crisis, not change, because of the urgency of the situation. They no longer refer to climate skeptics as skeptics, because skeptics, by definition, are seekers of the truth. And it doesn't seem to be that people don't seem to be believing the climate science that's coming at them, and they're remaining skeptics. Global heating, not global warming, to again, the sense of urgency. And then greenhouse gas emissions, not just carbon emissions, because there's more than carbon and carbon dioxide emitted. The picture there is from India. It was a winner in the Climate Visuals Photography Award. And you'll see the little yellow light shining there is powered by solar power. So we have a little video here. It's very short to give you an overview of the climate is changing.
As a result of the Industrial Revolution that kicked off in the mid-1700s, the Earth's surface is warming up at a never-seen-before rate. A major reason for the rise in temperatures is the increase in the concentration of greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere. These cause our planet to retain heat from the sun. Greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide and methane are released into the atmosphere when fossil fuels are burned. Trees and oceans absorb carbon dioxide, but can't handle the large amounts that are now building up in the Earth's atmosphere. And because our forests are shrinking, even less carbon dioxide is absorbed. The high levels of carbon dioxide are already acidifying oceans, killing off coral reefs. It's also triggering a dangerous rise in sea levels and an increase in extreme weather events. Around the world and across Europe, innovators are now racing against the clock to invent new ways to live in our cities, use land, manufacture products, and run our businesses. New innovations are bringing down greenhouse gas emissions to confront climate change and its threat to our health and our economies, while creating new, sustainable growth and jobs. Join us at Climate Kick.
So as you can see, there's a lot of work going on in this area, but what we find is the public expects both national and local governments to get involved and to protect and enhance our environment. This was never clearer than the Fridays for the Future initiative, which happened throughout 2019, and Limerick was no different to any other. An awful lot of young people out basically asking that we do not leave the planet in the same state for them to have to manage as it's been left for us. So why should we be concerned? So the climate is changing, sea level rises, weather events are becoming more frequent and intense, biodiversity loss, and then climate justice. So Pat is going to explain this wonderful video emissions now.
Thank you, Sinead. This is a useful animation that was prepared by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the United States of America. It draws its principal data from 2 places provided by the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. In the Antarctic, the data is represented by the blue dot on the left-hand side, and from Mauna Loa in Hawaii, which is represented here by the red dot. And indeed, it was in Mauna Loa in Hawaii that atmospheric concentrations of CO2 were first recorded by Dr. Charles David Keeling, who went on to develop what became famously known as the Keeling curve, which predicted that if we didn't take some action to reduce fossil fuel emissions or anthropomorphic forcing, we would actually exceed 400 parts per million in the near future. And as you can see from the pump handle rising here, that has indeed come to pass. Indeed, by the time this animation finishes, the level will be 411 parts per million in the end of 2019. On the right-hand side, what we're going to see is a look back to try and understand what kind of levels of CO2 concentrations have there been in the past. And in the beginning here, what we see is a representation of CO2 concentrations in the pre-industrial age, which shows the CO2 concentration to be about 278 parts per million. But by analyzing ice cores from Greenland and from Antarctica, we can go back considerable periods of time, indeed back 800,000 years, and analyzing the air bubbles in those ice cores, we can see that the fluctuation in CO2 concentrations was always less than 300 parts per million, even going back through several ice ages. The worry for us, of course, is that we have never seen these levels of CO2 concentrations that we see today. And one of the big concerns we have is the impact that those levels will have on our surface temperatures and climatic events in the future. One of the issues we're looking at here, where we look to see where are the emissions coming from, we can see by looking at this quick graphic that some of the greatest emitters, of course, are in the developed countries, but principally in the Northern Hemisphere. And this is a useful illustration to show essentially we're on fire, we're burning, and we're producing huge amounts of CO2. This represents grams of carbon. Thank you, Sinead. Here we can see how Europe is faring in relation to our EU partners, the other 28. And unfortunately, we're very much at the bottom of the league. Europe has an average of 8.6 tons per capita of CO2. Here in Ireland, we're producing 13.2 tons, and that's 53% over the European average. And those are 2018 figures. So you can see we have a great deal to do to try to tackle our CO2 emissions.
And some of the reasons why we're doing this or looking to tackle our carbon emissions is to do with weather events. The picture in the top left-hand corner was Storm Darwin. Many of you will remember it as our first red weather alert. 19 trees came down in the People's Park that year, okay, in that one storm, in that hour and a half or so. The picture on the right and underneath on the left are both of St. Mary's Park, which was subject to very serious flooding. And we were very lucky that there was no loss of life, but many people were displaced for quite some time with that. And then on the bottom right, we see the lovely River Shannon, which flows through our city. But you can see how high it can rise, and oftentimes it comes in over onto the road surfaces and that and beyond. So we have to be careful there. There's also a cost involved in climate change or the climate crisis. And since 1980 up to 2017, these are some of the calculations done by the European Union, 28 member state countries. 91,000 people have lost their lives, mostly due to heat wave type events. Losses over 500 billion have been experienced during that time. And the insured losses that have been paid out are about a third of that, 148 billion. So over to Pat.
Of course, one of the things we always consider, we're concerned about is sea level rise, as Sinead pointed out there in the photograph near Merchants Quay. And here, quite likely by the end of the century, we'll be approaching 1 meter sea level rise if we don't take significant action. And that type of sea level rise is going to make a considerable impact in County Limerick, indeed all of the counties around the Shannon Estuary. Worst case scenario, if we just allow things to go the way they're going, we could possibly see 3 meters, but it's unlikely. But this slide shows you the kind of catastrophic impact that would have in County Limerick.
Biodiversity loss is another thing that is a result, if you like, of climate change, but also the contributors to climate change and climate crisis also contribute to biodiversity loss. So though we see relatively small blue on the right-hand side, which is climate change affecting biodiversity, we also see the huge level of habitat degradation, which directly plays into climate change, and also pollution, which is another thing that helps cause climate change. So we can see there that biodiversity is significantly impacted by climate change. Climate justice is another area, and particularly our president, former President Mary Robinson, is very keen on this area and has a foundation for climate justice. Her book, Climate Justice from 2015, outlines how concerned she is about the poorest and most vulnerable peoples of the world, and that they are at the greatest risk from our climate crisis. And there's even some small island countries that have bought land in other countries because they believe that they're going to be under sea and they're going to positively immigrate to another country. The relationship between the pandemic and the climate change is also under discussion at the moment. Dr. Jane Goodall, a renowned scientist, would say we've done this to ourselves, that we don't see ourselves as part of nature, and our disrespect for nature has helped facilitate pandemics such as the coronavirus. And then also Sir David Attenborough would say that the climate issue is also seen as being rather in the distant future rather than urgent, the way the virus is at the minute. And whereas the virus does have to be urgent at the minute, we also need the climate crisis and the climate issue back on the pages. Both of their interviews can be seen on either Channel 4 News or Sky News. So over to the Limerick Clare Energy Agency.
Thank you, Sinead. Well, the Energy Agency was established by the two local authorities, Limerick City and County Council and Clare County Council. One of the things that we were asked to do was to examine how much energy we would need to support society and the economy. And then looking at that energy, what type of energy, the fuel mix. And of course, based on the fuel mix, you get different types of emissions. And so we were able to calculate energy emissions based on the amount of energy we're consuming. One of the things we learned from our analysis was that if we are to try and achieve the targets that have been set by Europe and by Ireland, we must reduce our carbon footprint associated with energy. And indeed, everybody, each individual needs to reduce their carbon footprint by 1.25 tons per person. So, and that would give us, if everybody did that, that would give us about 450,000 tons reduction. So that's significant when you put it across the region Limerick Clare. So how do you save a simple ton? Well, you can do it a number of different ways. Here are some simple examples. For example, you could reduce your electricity consumption by 2,100 kilowatt hours. You could reduce your heating oil by 350 litres, or indeed reduce your car travel by 180 miles, or maybe don't take that far on holiday. 4 hours air travel will also save you a ton. These are simple things that will save that first ton, and if you go a little bit more, you can save that 1 1/4 and help us achieve our individual targets for 2020. One of the things that people and businesses are all doing now is trying to figure out, how do you go about addressing your own carbon footprint? Now, a methodology for doing this was developed by the World Resources Institute and the World Development Corporation for Sustainable Development. They developed a methodology during the 1990s, and that was formalized into a specific standard by 2001. That standard was called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. In it, people break up their activity broadly into three areas. The first type of activity is the direct combustion of energy where you are, in your own home or in your own business, your own area of activity is specific. The next area of activity is what they call indirect combustion. It's principally electricity, because, as you know, most electricity is generated away from you. And so the emissions associated with your electricity consumption are then calculated. And then finally, there's the third type of emissions to be taken into consideration. And they will be associated largely with things that happen well outside your business, but they happen because you are in business or because you're using those services. So they will be like waste, water generation, and indeed business travel or that personal travel, as we spoke about earlier. So those are the three broad areas. This is a very useful presentation that gives some indication of how carbon footprinting works.
Change and how you should reduce your carbon footprint. But what is that exactly? Just like an actual footprint, it's a mark you leave upon the environment. No, not with your shoes, but with every action that releases carbons. Those are the harmful gases, such as CO2, which are pumped out by burning fossil fuels like oil or gas. The more fuel you use, the bigger your footprint will be. You may think that by driving your car, the only carbons you release come from the engine, but no. Consider the carbons that are emitted just to get fuel into the tank. From the energy needed to extract the oil from underground, the pollution caused by transportation and refinement, to the final delivery to your local petrol station. Not to mention the CO2 released by manufacturing your car in the first place. More than you thought, huh? So unless you live in a cave, you and everything you own has its own carbon footprint. Read a book? Printing and distributing. It uses energy. Brush your teeth, and your utensils will have a history in a factory. Even something as basic as an apple could have traveled hundreds or even thousands of polluting miles to end up in your local supermarket. You see, it's pretty much impossible to leave no carbon footprint behind, but that's no reason to stop trying. Think about your actions and choices, and you'll be able to reduce your personal mark after all. That's how you really put the boot into climate change.
So here are some simple carbon management tools. We've broken them broadly here into two groups. There's a business group and a personal use. Rather than go through the mechanics here of actually doing a specific calculation, these online tools you'll find very, very useful. In the personal use, you can just simply go in and answer some fairly basic questions as to your level of activity, whether you're small, medium, or large. If you're in the business area, then you will be asked for more specific information, specific quantities. But all of these tools are pretty much free to use and very simple to use. If you're in business and you want to be involved in any kind of carbon disclosure program, then some of these tools, particularly the first two or three, will also help you there, but you may find you have to pay for some of those services because they will require some degree of verification or validation of the information that you've submitted. But if you don't require that level of auditing, then you can still use these tools and you can use them free of charge. They're very simple and easy to use. Thank you, Sinead.
From the point of view of the carbon footprint at an individual level, it's very important. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world, because it's the only thing that ever has. And that was a quote from Margaret Mead. So we can choose to cycle or walk. Remember, the walking times may be shorter than you think, and this walking map is available from limerick.ie. And say, for instance, the walking time from the university into the city centre is actually 25 minutes. We could use the car share scheme that's going, the Go Car, or use the bike share scheme that's available in the city centre. We could choose to use public transport, and at the moment we should please ask that you remember to wear your masks when on public transport. You also need to engage, and this is quite important, particularly when development plans or consultation plans come along. Your views need to be taken on board, and there is always extensive consultation periods for these. And to get your views in, we would really appreciate, particularly the city and county development plan is going to go to public consultation in the not too distant future, or a draft, if you like, a framework for it. And we would love to get your views in there. Participate in things like the Bike Week and Bespoke Week, because it says something about us that we do like to cycle, that we do want to commute more in this manner, if you like. And the Golden Bike Scheme is a lovely lead up into, it's one of the schools initiatives under the Green Schools programme. There are many programmes out there for young people, Eco, UNESCO, various things, Young Entrepreneur or Young Environmentalist of the Year, that type of thing. Green Schools, we're a leading light internationally. Ireland is in the Green Schools programme, where schools work on a variety of themes. And this is where you see collections of individuals making a difference together, if you like, in a structured way. And we see this as well with our green communities or our tidy towns. Tidy towns is no longer about just being tidy. They have very definite environmental criteria inbuilt into it now. There's a sustainability category, doing more with less, and it's expected that we put effort into this. It isn't just about looking pretty. We need to have our pollinators out there. We need to be managing our water. We need to manage our resources efficiently, if you like. There's also a specialist project specifically on climate action for their special projects within the tidy towns. Now over for carbon footprint for business, back to Pat.
So in business, we're very lucky because, if you'll pardon the pun, we have one of the leading buildings in Ireland. We have a LEED Gold building, and LEED, LEED, is an American standard, environmental standard for buildings. There is a level above it, it's platinum, but it wouldn't be any more energy efficient. Platinum standard really just refers to additional services that would be available in a Southern American market, which we don't need. So the LEED Gold is the perfect standard for us, and we're very fortunate. This is a perfect example of how you renovate a building to the highest possible standards. Other businesses, of course, are actively engaged in tackling their energy or their sustainability, and examples of those would be the Strand Hotel, working in conjunction with another Limerick company, Resourcecraft, to install software and metering equipment. And through management of this, they've managed to reduce their energy consumption by 50%, which of course has the energy emissions reductions also of 50%. Others involved in this would be the Brown Thomas Positive Champion campaign, where they look at staff training, working with suppliers on sustainability supply chains, and also looking at the range of sustainability goals within the organization for other areas such as energy, waste, and water. Of course, as the Forbes magazine has pointed out, energy efficiency, climate responsibility, carbon reduction, these are all very much mainstream themes now in business. It makes corporate sense. It improves profitability. And you see this, of course, by companies like Marks and Spencer's, IKEA. Of course, we have our own examples in Vistacom and Analog, and our own retailers such as Dunn's and Tesco's in Ireland. It makes sense from a profitability point of view, but also from corporate social responsibility to tackle and address these issues. Sinead?
Yeah, so just some energy saving tips in terms of the office. Remember, The office lighting in particular can be up to 40% of the energy load within a building. So very important to switch off when you leave, and this will be true of home as well. Use the natural daylight when you can. We've all had glares on our screens where we've needed to close the blinds or whatever behind us, but do we open them again once the sun moves around? Install photocells and detectors. Presence detectors are really important, particularly in walking areas and bathrooms and the like, and even where people sit at their desks, it can work very, very well indeed. More energy efficient lamps also can save up to 50% of your energy costs. Your photocopier left on standby can use up to 20% of its normal energy, so really important to switch this off when it's not in use. Printing on both sides of the pages also saves energy, but leaving a photocopier on it overnight uses enough energy to produce over 1,500 copies. So think about it, if we left our photocopiers on all over the pandemic, think about the amount of copies we could have made that we might have needed. Okay, when you go, this is also true in particularly in an office, a PC left on over the year can cost up to 150 euros. And this is, I'm talking about the standbys here as well, folks. So a photocopier up to 300 euros per annum. So count the machines around your office, count the machines around your home, and think about what you might actually be wasting there, both in energy terms and even the cost to you as well. Now over to tips, tools, and resources.
So most people look at the meters in their buildings and they don't really think about them at all. They're pretty much installed, of course, by the utility companies so that they can charge you for the energy that you consume. But those meters are available to you. All you'd have to do is read them, and you could learn an awful lot about the energy use in your building. If you don't like reading meters, or you find it difficult to read meters, you can of course install a simple piece of hardware which comes with a little electrical display unit which will tell you how much energy you've used last week, last month. Always make sure, if you're not comfortable with this kind of equipment, get an electrician to install it for you. But if you are comfortable reading meters, a simple pen and paper, and by taking 4 or 5 readings, you can learn a tremendous amount about your business or your home energy use. So just read your meter first thing Monday morning, first thing Monday evening, on Tuesday morning, and again on Friday evening, and then the following Monday morning. And with just those 5 readings, you've learned tremendous amount. How much energy do you use during the day? How much energy do you normally use in a full working week? How much energy is used at night? And how much energy is used at the weekend? And of course, the important thing, just like the Strand Hotel and others, if knowing these things helps you to make a decision, then you'll find that this kind of simple information gathering process can help you save a tremendous amount of energy, and of course that will reduce your CO2 emissions. In the Energy Agency, we've prepared a simple Excel spreadsheet calculator. It's available for download from the website. If you just gather your utility bills, you can put the information into this spreadsheet. It will convert all of your energy to the standard units of kilowatt hours. If you put in the area of your building or another performance indicator that's more suitable for you, it will calculate your energy performance. It also converts the energy to the CO2, the carbon dioxide emissions associated with that energy. So it gives you a carbon footprint for the amount of energy used as well. This is free of charge. It's a very simple tool to use. It's a good place to start, particularly for those first and second types of energy that we spoke about earlier in the greenhouse gas protocol. Sinead.
So just some energy saving tips from home. Insulation is key, and over 40% of energy is wasted from buildings due to poor or no insulation. So that's particularly for those of us who are living in older houses, a really important message. Ventilate freely with natural ventilation during the day, but please, please, when the heating is on, don't be trying to heat the great outdoors. So only open your windows when the heating is off. It's very, very important. Sunlight and heat, make the most of any sunlight and heat. If the sun is coming in a particular window, open the inside door there, keep the curtains open, let the natural energy of the sun heat up your rooms. Space heating, even reducing by just 1 degree, bringing the temperature down from 20 degrees or 21 degrees down to 20 or 19 can save 8% of your energy costs. Avoid overriding the time and temperature controls that you might have on your settings. Try not to use electric heaters. Keep your pipes insulated and consider heating with renewable resources if you can. For hot water, it's very important to insulate hot water tanks. Now, most new builds would have pre-insulated tanks being put in. Consider installing solar thermal panels. Use your timers on your electric immersions, and heat water at nighttime rates if you can with the night saving meter, and use showers wherever practical. In terms of your fridge and freezers, keep the doors closed. Don't leave them open for any length of time. Never put warm food in the fridge. Defrost regularly, and if you're upgrading, upgrade to a frost-free freezer if you can, and occasionally clean and check the door seals. When you're motoring, remember, shopping around, you can save up to 20% on the costs. You can save half of your cost by carpooling and 100% of your cost by cycling or walking. Okay, and this one I found really interesting. Driving aggressively or too fast can add 10% to your urban consumption and up to 25% in rural consumption. So we should all be staying within those speed limits, folks. Check your tire pressures regularly, because poorly inflated tires can use more fuel. The same thing with regular maintenance, because of the air and oil filters. If they're not regularly maintained, they'll use more fuel. And avoid carrying objects on the roof, because that will use more fuel as well, and also excess weight in your boot. And this is particularly important for any golfers out there. You shouldn't be leaving your golf clubs in your boot all week long. So Pat's going to tell us a little bit about the future of energy here with the Limerick City Exchange.
Yeah, thank you, Sinead. Just a quick introduction. Limerick City is Ireland's first lighthouse city. We're participating in a Horizon 2020 project that's bringing several million euros of EU funding to a project that we're doing in the heart of this Limerick Georgian Innovation District. We would hope to retrofit up to 20 buildings as part of our project, and indeed through the lessons that we learn, maybe go on to retrofit hundreds of buildings more. And we'll be installing solar panels, we'll be installing independent renewable energy as generation in the city, installing a virtual community grid, and enabling city trading, establishing community energy company as well. Thank you, Sinead. Some of the things we hope to do will be reducing our energy demand in that area by 2.1 million kilowatt hours. We'll be hoping to add 1.2 kilowatt hours of renewable energy from our independent renewable generator and solar panels installed in buildings. And we'll be hoping to reduce our CO2 emissions initially, just by the first few buildings, by 750 tons. So those are some of the initial targets we have for our Positive City Exchange. And we hope that this project is going to help us maintain Limerick's prominent position as a lighthouse city and one of Ireland's smart cities in the future, in the transition to a low carbon economy and society. Thank you, Sinead.
Thanks, Pat. These are some of the useful references that we used in terms of putting this presentation together, if you like. A lot of the information can be found on, a video of this webinar will actually be up on our European Greenleaf YouTube channel. You can find more about the programme of events of the Greenleaf City events on limerick.ie, and the other websites there from the logos, you'll be able to get them just by Googling. I suppose the key message from a presentation like this is that we're all in this together, and Pat will agree with me here. It doesn't matter whether you're an individual or a business, a local authority, government, the Europe, where you are in the world, we all need to work together on this one. And now that is the end of the webinar, if you like, and we're going to go over to questions and answers now. So I'm just going to pull up the chat and we'll go from there. So we have a number of, if there are no questions, that's fine. We did get one question emailed to us beforehand, Pat, and it was to do with the notion of carbon sinks, and were trees the only things that could be used as a carbon sink in terms of green infrastructure?
No, trees are probably the most efficient, of course, because they're so large. But really, any organic plant-based system that absorbs carbon and releases oxygen is going to act as a carbon sink. The good thing about trees, of course, is that it takes the carbon and it absorbs it, and the carbon becomes part of the structure of the tree and stays that way for quite some time. So it's probably the most efficient way of doing it. But any plant-based organism that uses carbon as part of its respiratory process will do the same thing.
Okay, we have a question in from Ailish, and Ailish is wondering if we could talk a little bit about short-term flights and the carbon footprint generated.
So by short-term, I suppose in my thinking, I think of short-term as mainland Europe. If I was going to go to Spain, and that's why we picked that figure of 4 hours, because most people who are thinking about going somewhere are probably thinking about taking a 2 to 2.5 hour flight there and a 2 to 2.5 hour flight. So they're pretty much the short-term flights. And if you can avoid one of those flights, you've saved yourself a ton of CO2. Obviously, if you take one of the longer flights to Australia, United States of America, East Coast or the West Coast, for every 2 hours that you travel, it's costing 0.5 ton of CO2. So it's quite simple to do the math in that sense, because even going to the UK is going to use CO2.
Okay,
so that helps.
Thanks for that, Pat. Ailish, I hope that answered your question now. And then again, we have another question. Is there a tree plan to provide a natural solution to flooding? I might take that one. We're in the process of putting together a policy around trees within the council, and that is likely to form part of that. Any other questions, folks? Just let me see now. Let me scroll down here. No, so there's no more questions this evening. I'd like to thank you all for participating in our webinar, and hopefully you'll get to see the next webinar, which is coming up in 2 weeks' time. Go to our EGLA, limerick.ie EGLA Greenleaf page on limerick.ie for further details. All right, thank you. Good night now.
Bye-bye.